Hello, and welcome to Fact Fragments with Serenity Lee. Today, in honor of Dark Phoenix coming out on June 7th, I'd like to take a look at the origin of the Phoenix. Beware, there may be potential spoilers. I'm not quite sure how they're going to do this movie, but let's take a look at the character who started it all. Jean Grey was introduced in September 1963 in the comic The X-Men #1. She was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. She originally went by the name Marvel Girl and was the sole female member on the X-Men team. She originally had the powers of telekinesis. Later, she was given telepathy in X-Men #43 in 1968. This was later retconned in Bizarre Adventures #27 in 1981 as a suppressed ability. But before we get there, we have the Phoenix Saga. Phoenix was created in 1976 by Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum in X-Men issue #101. Jean Grey is returning from a mission to space and is exposed to radiation from a solar flare. Here, she comes into contact with the Phoenix Force, and she is able to reach her full potential as a telekinetic and telepath. She reimagines herself on Earth as the Phoenix, with a new costume. She uses this incredible power, but then restrains herself voluntarily. This makes her a target for the villain Mastermind. He manipulates her into believing that she is reliving her past life as Lady Grey. Lady Grey, in the memories, was Hellfire Club's Black Queen. This causes Jean Grey to accept that she is the true Black Queen. This causes her to remove some of the barriers on her power and to turn against the X-Men. When Mastermind kills Cyclops' psychic image, this causes Jean Grey to break his hold on her and all the barriers that she had put on her power. She is overwhelmed by the immensity of these powers, and she renames herself Dark Phoenix. She strikes at the X-Men and then leaves for space, only to arrive in a distant galaxy, her powers nearly drained. In order to restore her powers, she devours the energy from a nearby star, causing a supernova that kills the entire population of a nearby planet. The Shi'ar, who were in a ship nearby, attack her to stop her from destroying any more stars. She was able to destroy them, but not before they alerted the Empress Lilandra. An intergalactic council determines that the Dark Phoenix is too dangerous to live. The Dark Phoenix returns to Earth only for the X-Men to attack. Charles Xavier arrives, and they battle psychically. He ends up erecting new barriers, allowing her to return to her normal Marvel Girl powers. The Shi'ar arrive and abduct the X-Men, letting them know of the genocidal actions of the Dark Phoenix. Upon learning that Jean's punishment is to be put to death, Charles Xavier challenges Lilandra to Arinin Halar, a Shi'ar duel of honor that cannot be refused. Lilandra agrees, and they do battle. The Imperial Guard defeats most of the X-Men, leaving only Cyclops and the Phoenix. When Jean sees Cyclops seemingly killed, she panics and reverts to her Dark Phoenix persona. Xavier orders the X-Men to subdue her. After a short battle, Jean regains control, and she races into some nearby ruins and activates a Kree weapon that disintegrates her. In an interview with the Austin Chronicle, Chris Claremont discusses the problem that they had just created. One of their good characters had become a mass murderer on an epic scale. They couldn't let her off the hook because they had depicted her as inseparable from the Phoenix Force and therefore completely responsible for her actions. Chris Claremont went on to say that they would not have even been able to put her into some kind of cosmic jail because then the X-Men storyline would have been consumed with their efforts of trying to get her back, fighting through everyone to do it. But she was a genocidal killer now, so she could not remain alive. Therefore, in what ended up being one of the most memorable scenes in comics, they did the only thing they could do. They had her kill herself. choosing to die as a human rather than live as a god. Chris Claremont intended for Jean Grey to stay dead. Her story had ended in the most epic way. But, as a phoenix does, she returned. Editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, Jim Shooter, had made it a rule that they could not bring back Jean Grey unless they somehow found a way to make her not responsible for the genocidal actions of the Phoenix. Knowing Jim Shooter's rule, 3 college students who would themselves go on to work in Marvel Comics got together to determine how they could make Jean return. These college students were none other than Kurt Busiek, Carol Kalish, and Richard Howell. Kurt Busiek's idea was that Jean had not actually come out of the shuttle crash, and that the Phoenix Force had made a duplicate of her mind and body. His idea was that this duplicate would become more distorted and corrupted the longer it stayed away from Jean Grey. This was later used in 1985 when they created the new series X Factor. While Kurt Busiek was not a writer for this series, he was credited for his idea. Before the resurrection of Jean Grey, there was Madeline Pryor. In 1983, Madeline Pryor was introduced, and she looked identical to Jean Grey. Not only that, but she survived an airline crash at the exact moment that Jean died. Over a course of events, she becomes the Dark Phoenix, and Cyclops is horrified. He exchanged the same conversation with Madeline that he had with Jean Grey after Xavier had locked away her Dark Phoenix powers. But it all ended up just being an illusion by Mastermind in order to get back at them for what had happened with Jean Grey. This Phoenix and Dark Phoenix storyline has been visited in other X-Men media portrayals. In the 90s, the X-Men animated series visited it in a new way. Here, the Phoenix was a force that actually entered Jean's body and was completely separate from her. As in the comics, Jean Grey's powers grow immensely. She becomes the Dark Phoenix and turns against the X-Men. After a battle and help from Lilandra and the Shi'ar, they are able to convince the Phoenix Force to leave Jean's body. In the year 2000, we had X-Men Evolution. At one point, Jean loses control of her powers and is only subdued by Rogue. At the end of the series, Charles Xavier, while under Apocalypse's control, sees a vision of Jean becoming the Dark Phoenix. The series was cancelled before they were able to delve into the depths of the Dark Phoenix saga. In 2009, we had Wolverine and the X-Men. In a 3-part arc, we find that Emma Frost, who had been secretly working with the Hellfire Club, actually tells Jean Grey about the Phoenix Force. Jean's Phoenix abilities are triggered, and she later unleashes the full Phoenix Force. In order to stop her, Emma Frost absorbs the Phoenix Force into her own body, turning into Diamond and then shattering. This leaves the Phoenix Force with no host. In the original X-Men trilogy movies, Jean Grey is portrayed by Famke Janssen. She starts the series as Jean Grey with no Phoenix powers. In X2, Jean Grey sacrifices herself, holding back a huge wave of water from a burst dam in order for the rest of the X-Men to flee. As the camera pans over the water, we see a giant flaming bird shape, delighting fans everywhere at the foreshadowing of the Phoenix Saga to come. In the 3rd movie of the original X-Men trilogy, X-Men: The Last Stand, Jean Grey returns from her supposed death. Here we are shown that as a young girl, Charles Xavier placed barriers in her mind in order to protect her from the abilities that she could not control. This caused a split in her psyche. Jean Grey, who had full control over her limited powers, and the Phoenix, who was an insanely powerful creature who had little to no empathy or regard for others. Due to Jean's actions in the previous movie, the barriers are destroyed and the Phoenix is able to gain dominance. The Phoenix kills Scott Summers and Professor Xavier before joining Magneto. Originally abstaining from the battle at Alcatraz, she is brought into it when the military starts to fire on her. This enrages her, and the Phoenix gains full control and starts ripping apart everything close to her at the molecular level. Wolverine, being the only one who could come close due to his healing abilities, begins to walk toward Jean. After reaching her, she asks him if he would die to save all of humanity, and he replies that he would die only to save her. Upon hearing these words, Jean is able to come to the forefront of her mind, and she asks that Logan save her. Telling her he loves her, he stabs her with his claws and ends her life and her rampage. In X-Men Apocalypse, Jean Grey also appears, this time played by Sophie Turner. This movie is set many years before the events that happened in the original X-Men trilogy. Here, she does not seem to have the barriers in place, or they are not as strong as they ought to be, because she has many problems controlling her powers and is therefore ostracized by her peers. In the final battle against Apocalypse, Xavier convinces her to unleash her full powers against him. She is able to shatter Apocalypse's astral projection, disintegrate his body, and finally defeat him. As she does, her body is surrounded by a flaming bird-shaped aura. And here is where we are as we anticipate Dark Phoenix. Sophie Turner will return as Jean Grey, and we will find out what happens when she unleashes the Phoenix. And that is all on the Phoenix Saga for now. Let me know in the comments if you have any ideas what might happen during Sophie Turner's run as the Dark Phoenix. Will they use any of the ideas that they've already done, or will it be something new? Thank you so much for watching, and please like, comment, and subscribe. Goodbye.